All right, hello folks, and welcome to another pairing stream with James Shore.
Hi everyone.
So I did that rename that I was going to do of game table to game row, and it was relatively straightforward.
Yeah, and you like how it turned out?
I like it much better, yes.
Yeah.
And unsurprisingly, the raw SQL that we were writing had to be changed, but it was easy to find and easy to fix, and so so yeah.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so how's the times change treating you?
I hate it.
Yeah, me too. I've just been dragging all day. So if I seem like kind of low energy today, it's because of yeah. Hey, Suiji, welcome. Yes.
Suiji.
Yeah.
So the time change is good for all our European friends because it's an hour earlier for them, so they don't have to stay up so late.
That's right. I guess we should have said something last time. So glad some folks found us. Thanks for coming, Suiji. And I know that there's a bill to potentially put us on permanent daylight schedule, but I don't know if it's gonna go anywhere.
Yeah,
I have no faith.
I mean, I prefer regular standard time over daylight savings, but just not having to switch would be nice.
Yeah. I don't really care which one it is. I'm more of a night owl, so later in the day is fine. But I live far enough north that at the summer solstice, it's light all the time. Like I think the sun sets at 10:30 right now. Oh, wow. And then in the winter, not now, but at that time on daylight savings, around July, the sun will be setting at 10:30, and then of course in the winter it's setting at 4:30, and you get up in the dark, you go to work in the dark, you get off work in the dark. It doesn't really matter. So if I didn't have to switch, I'd just be happy, whichever way it ended up.
Yeah, what makes it worse is since I have a lot of friends or folks in Europe, they don't switch until the end of March. So there's like these 2 weeks where everything is just like, what's going on? What time is it? And then finally they switch over, and it's like, okay, now we're back to what we were used to.
Every so often I've had this fantasy, like if I ruled the world and, could do whatever I wanted and, mind control, and everybody would just go along with it. I was like, well, what if we just all have the same clock and we just change what we say is daylight hours are? Like, right? If it was all UTC, and my daylight hours or my work hours were 12 a.m. to 8 a.m., that would be fine. It'd be so much easier to keep track of. But then, of course, it would be, well, what time do you work? So I don't know that it would actually be better. It's a good thing I don't rule the world, because I'd probably make a hash of it.
Well, it's funny. It came up, I forget exactly where, I think on my Discord somewhere, talking about, like, the old saying of the two hard problems in computer science. It's like, I don't do cache invalidation. The problems I have is time zones. That's what I deal with on a weekly basis or a daily basis is time zones. I don't do any cache invalidation. So that is not a problem I have in computers.
Yeah. I've got my training course, my Nullables training course coming up on April 11th and 12th. And when I was putting it together, I still don't know if I got the time zones right? Because I know what the times are at the time I scheduled it.
Yes.
But then daylight savings happens, and I know people don't all go on daylight savings at the same time. Yeah. So did I get it right?
Yeah.
I think I did. Yeah. Guess we'll find out in April.
Yeah, that was the fun part in Ensembler, because it's all about scheduling stuff and showing you the time based on what time zone you're in, the person who logs in and is viewing it. And I made sure to test drive that really carefully. And like, okay, I'm planning this. It's not currently daylight savings time, but it will be when it happens. And it's like, oh, okay, it worked. So I was happy. But yeah,
doesn't Java have that all built in? I mean, it's all constantly updating, so you have to get the latest files to make it work right.
Yeah. And that's only for sort of corner cases where somebody's changed it, like in the past year or something like that. Because I'm usually more up to date than that. Yeah, just use UTC is not good enough. So it's like it's that's the first part, but then and even now, I mean, and we can probably talk about this forever, is like, okay, but what if I plan it now and then the law changes?
Mm-hmm.
And then then it's like, now, did you save the original time you thought it was going to be scheduled for, as well as in UTC? And so, oh man,
yeah. The really hard people say, oh well, we need to make ourselves a really fast sorting algorithm. It's like, no, somebody's done that. The really hard problems in software development, human problems.
Yeah.
The more humans deal with it, the more of a pain in the ass it is. So dates and times, calendars. Not every country uses the Gregorian calendar.
Right.
And of course, money.
Yes.
Money.
Yeah. Also, byte encoding. I use this service, and in order to move people from one course to another because of reasons, I had to basically download a CSV, muck around with it, and then upload it back to the same service, because the two parts of their system had different formats. And it turned out Excel was assuming not UTF-8, it was assuming Windows Latin 1. And so it looked fine in the
Microsoft's
spreadsheet.
Kind of terrible.
Yeah, well, But it was like, oh, wait, there's actually an option to save CSV specifically as UTF-8. Okay.
If I had money for every time somebody screwed up financial stuff, I would have 3.0000001.
Don't multiply. Just don't multiply, and you're fine.
I know of a company whose bread and butter was financial transactions, and they were using a double, and and it worked fine up until the point they wanted to refund line items that had tax,
and
then they were screwed. So yeah. Don't use doubles for financial calculations, guys.
And also, I was using, and this is more primitive obsession than doubles. So the service I'm using to sell my course, my refactoring hexagonal architecture course, has a page that shows you discounts, and it shows you, well, what you'd like to see is how much basically in a sense, you've lost through discounts, because that's what I presume it was trying to show. Instead, what it did is it added up all the percentages and showed it as a dollar amount. You've $3.20 in redemptions. Like, no, that makes no sense. And even if you added it up, that makes no sense. What are you trying to do? And how could you confuse percentages with dollar amounts? Oh my God.
I think I know which service you're talking about. And I've actually been thinking of switching them, because I've been using Eventbrite, but I don't love them. But
I mean, otherwise I love the service, but that was just like, how did, first of all, like, okay, bugs happen, like somebody misinterpreted something somewhere, but it's just,
I've got a lot of sympathy for people making mistakes, because I've been in the biz long enough to make all the mistakes,
right?
Including deleting a production database. We've all done it. I've done it.
Forgetting the where clause is a key problem.
Yeah.
Just like, update. Oops, I forgot the where.
Yeah. So, excuse me. So, yeah, these things happen. But at the same time, I do want people to test their code and to write tests. And so if I can't come up with a reason why this isn't a really obscure case that they just missed, then I start getting a little bit salty.
Yeah.
Because that starts to say something about the underlying development habits. Like, I used Recurly for a long time, and I could just tell that their engineering practices were not up to snuff.
Yeah.
Because they were breaking stuff a lot.
Yeah.
And that's, when I see that, I'm like, okay, it's time for me to consider another provider. Because if they don't have core engineering practices, then we got issues.
Yeah, especially in the finance stuff. It's like, I want you to be pretty solid.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of finance, well, I guess let's not go there. But there has been some big financial news.
Let's not go there. That's. I mean, honestly, like the answer is don't allow runs on banks, and that's it. Just slow down the transfers. There was a joke that's like, this would never happen with Bitcoin because it would take you 10 years to withdraw that amount of money.
I don't know if that's a saving grace.
Anyway. Yeah,
so for those of you watching the video, years in the future, it's currently March 13th, 2023, and Silicon Valley Bank is what we're not going to talk about, and they have just been shut down by the Fed. So yeah, let's the first advantage of Bitcoin ever. Yeah, also putting lots of carbon in the atmosphere is really good for that.
That's not great. That's not a good trade-off.
It's really not. So what we were going to work on today is we were going to talk about A-frame architecture.
Yeah.
Finally, we're going to do some A-frame architecture. And what we had said we were going to do last time is we were going to look at your existing yacht controller, which is kind of like the single page app for the yacht game. You've got a couple of other controllers, but yacht controller is the big one.
Right.
And we were going to see, well, what can we do to make this, to see what this would look like? And I have been complaining to, from the beginning about GameService. And you've made changes to GameService, maybe in reaction to those complaints, that honestly make them a lot less valid. Like the GameService you have now is not too far off from what I would consider. But
yeah, I mean, and we've talked about this before. It wasn't that I added it because you complained. It was added because as basically the repository persistence plus additional communication with the outside world, that's where it really pulls its weight. Otherwise, it is a fairly useless layer. Yeah.
But I still can't help but think that there is a better way, and that may just be the sort of normal thing that every programmer gets when they look at unfamiliar code. So I like to say that you've got people talk about things being read only or read write. Well, code is write only. It's always hard to read, and people confuse that difficulty reading unfamiliar code with code that's bad. But
yes.
You have to have a lot of empathy, I think, when you're reading code for there is a reason things are, and it's not because the other person was stupid.
Right.
And I meet so many programmers whose instinctive reaction on looking at unfamiliar code is to say this is garbage.
Yeah.
But that is absolutely the wrong way to approach it. Because there are reasons for the way things are today. That's not to say there isn't bad code in the world.
Right.
But even so, like the worst code I see tends to be code that's been around for a long time and didn't have tests and didn't get refactored.
Yep.
People were under a lot of time pressure.
Yep.
And so, but even that code, it started out with this underlying design concept that was part of the original design. And then over time, as more people came along that weren't aware of that underlying design concept, it got crufted up.
Yep.
But you can still find the beauty in that code if you look for it. And I think that search for the underlying beauty is really important.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's like, legacy code kind of gets a bad name sometimes, but it's like, that's, providing the value, and it can be sort of drudgery to work on certain kinds of legacy code. Like I talked to some people at a large company, and I'm just like, oh, the pain I'm feeling just you telling me about all this static coupling and stuff that just makes me cringe. But like there is a certain also like satisfaction of being able to go in and say, and sort of, clear out the clutter and pull out those nuggets of oh, that's really good, that's really interesting, that's really useful. So I think working on legacy code sometimes gets a bad rap. It's like, oh, I don't work that. Let's ship it off to the team in Poland and let them deal with it. And it's like, no, that's not the right way to do it.
Well, and the instinctive sort of knee-jerk reaction a lot of people have is to rewrite.
Oh,
and that is 100% a beginner move.
Yeah.
Like that is such a beginner move because, and you learn after doing a couple of these that way is hellish.
Yeah.
Because you go down that road and it's really nice to work on a new system. But then the business folks are going to start coming to you and saying, when is this going to be done? We're making no money.
Right.
We've got customers complaining. We've made promises. We're not delivering anything new on the old system. We need this new system out.
Yeah.
And it turns to it almost always turns into this horrible death march where you produce terrible code to replace the terrible code. It does not make things better.
Yeah. Yeah. I experienced not quite a rewrite, and this was one of the big mistakes in my career, was making a huge change to the persistence of this desktop app. And I said, let's just completely change the entire app to use this new persistence way of doing things. And, 4 weeks turned into 6 weeks, turned into 8 weeks. we were working weekends, and I'm like, oh man. And finally the manager just said, forget it. Let's just abandon this. It's it's one of those, you're 90% done for weeks and 99% done for weeks. And it was just like, I will never do that again. Like, you get burned badly, and it's always interesting. I always say that, we're of course shaped by our experiences. And so here's, when I talk about in my classes and elsewhere, like, here's why I do this, is because I was deeply affected by the fact that I couldn't write unit tests without having the server and a database up. Right? That really affected me and like my psyche. And that's why I feel so strongly about these kinds of separation things, where other people are like, that's not a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. And that 90% done is absolutely what you see in a rewrite, because even after you finish the rewrite, there are still going to be all these things that are in the existing software, the old software, that the new software doesn't do. And all your customers are going to be pissed off because the UI is different. Yeah. It doesn't matter if you think it's better. Right. They're going to be pissed off because the UI is different. Yeah. Yeah.
Xproof asks about, how do I throttle my services? I don't have services that I have to throttle, so it's not something I deal with directly. Usually honestly, I rely on like gateway services or other stuff if I need to do that. There's a lot of things that like, I feel like I don't need to deal with that. I'm going to have somebody else who's an expert at these kinds of things. I'm going to pay you money to do that.
I use Heroku for my stuff. Now, I mean, as an independent consultant, what I have to, I write my own software, and I've got a website that's written on my stack. Right. But at the same time, the worst thing that ever happened to it is I got on the front page of Hacker News twice and read it all simultaneously. And that's a fairly large amount of traffic. Yes. But I was on Heroku, so I imagine they did whatever they needed to do, and I was getting about 15 requests a second, which was completely handleable by the one machine I had, one dyno I had targeted to this. It wasn't the front page of Reddit; it was the front page of R programming, which is different. Yeah. It's actually when the Nullables article came out, it made the rounds. Yes. Yeah. So I did bump up. I was like watching my logs, and I was like, wow, there's a lot of traffic. This is kind of cool. And I was like, but I need to go to bed. So I'm like, I'm going to bump it up to 2 dynos. And then I went to bed. That was that. Yeah. Yeah. Paying people to do stuff for you is a great idea.
Yeah.
Xproof, I wouldn't say that. So you need to be aware of performance. You absolutely need to be aware of performance when you're developing services, but it's not. I would say rate limiting is more of an ops thing. I think DevOps is a word that gets misused a lot. It is very much an ops thing, but figuring out what scale your services need to handle, that is a combination of a business and engineering discussion. And then, of course, architecting your system to be horizontally scalable or vertically scalable or whatever the appropriate scalability technique is. That is an engineering discussion. So really, it's DevOps in the true sense of the word, in that we need ops, dev, and biz to get together and talk about our expectations. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really important to like figure out what are you shooting for, because sometimes it feels like people are shooting for the moon, and I'm like, look, you just need to drive across the street. Yeah. Like, okay, are you Ticketmaster selling, a big concert, or are you just like a local venue that holds 100 people and you're selling tickets for them? Because very, very different profiles.
Yeah. And the mistake I see programmers make is that everybody, it's sort of like the saying that in the US, everybody's an embarrassed millionaire, temporarily embarrassed millionaire. Every programmer wants to be a temporarily embarrassed Google. Yeah. You probably don't need the scaling techniques that you read about online for most stuff. It is amazing what one beefy machine with an SSD can handle. Yep. Put a couple hundred gigabytes of RAM in there, and your whole database is probably going to run in memory. So, I mean, there's Xproof. Look up how Stack Overflow runs someday. Yeah. One of the top 50 websites in the world, and they run on 2 SQL Server databases and like 5 web servers. But they also, so inter service rate limiting. I mean, you need what's the term? When you need back pressure.
Right.
You need to be able to tell the caller that you're taking too many requests and that they need to limit themselves. And then going out to the outside world, generally, if we're talking about abuse, like people just slamming you from the same IP, that's not something that your code would handle. That's something that the gateway would handle.
Yeah.
So should we do some yacht controller stuff?
Yeah, let's see what we can do.
So originally I said, well, let's see what happens if we re-implement this. And that's sort of I think that could be interesting, but at the same time, I'm thinking about it, well, that's the same old trick that everybody pulls. Let's rewrite, right? I don't want to do that. So there's something that sorry, I was distracted by the chat again. Xproof, you might have a service fabric or something that's managing that. It's not necessarily something that, hopefully you're not writing it on a service by service level. You're using a library or something where people charge you money for it. But either way, it's not something you're probably handling yourself. So whenever I'm looking at existing code, I like to do something called reflective design. And this starts out by analyzing the existing code, critiquing it, and saying, how does this fit with our existing code? And I kind of would like to do that now.
Sure.
If that works for you, Ted.
Go for it.
Okay. So I'm going to pull this up in Code Together, and this may or may not work. Are you seeing what I'm seeing as I scroll?
You are scrolling.
Okay. So yeah, what I'm going to do, so when I do reflective design, what I do is I start out with a thing that I want to modify. And I go through from there and I trace that out into all its dependencies, and I go until I think it's not interested anymore. And I often like build a little UML diagram, little class diagram saying this is how everything connects together. Or if I don't build it literally, I like just keep it in my head. But it always starts out by just tracing the flow of control and the dependencies. So I'm going to start out by doing that. The feature we're trying to implement here is persistence on the yacht controller, correct? Or has that already been implemented?
I mean, that's implemented. Did we plug that into? Yeah, so that's part of the service's responsibility, but did we plug in the new stuff? I don't think we did.
This is a little different because you kind of went ahead and built it, and then we came back and built it again.
Right.
But normally we'd be coming into this before we built it. But so I'm going to pretend that we're implementing the persistence. It's already in here, so we're just going to be refactoring. But and when I do reflective design, the purpose is to understand how the code can be improved to make adding the new feature easier. Like, I do not refactor code for the sake of refactoring code.
Yes.
Except on stream, because that's what we're doing here. But
there's still always we always have some kind of goal in mind. I mean, this is what I also always say about refactoring. It's like yes, there's always going to be code that I could improve it, but if you're not going to touch it afterwards, unless you're trying to understand the code, what I call sort of clarification refactoring. Usually you're refactoring because this needs a new type because there's no domain aspect of this list, so let's create a new type. Or I need to fit in this feature, we need to pull some stuff apart so we can do that sort of as a prepare refactoring. Exactly. We need to have sort of what is our goal, I think to me is a really important step of refactoring, because if you don't do that, then you're almost randomly refactoring stuff as you find it, which isn't really an efficient use of time.
And if your style is, I've got this new feature, I'm going to go look at the code, I'm going to refactor the code to make it better to put in this new feature. I'm going to put in the feature and refactor as I go, and then I'm done. Well, the one thing that you can do there is that you're often, as you're putting in the feature, going to make some design changes that you're going to say, I don't love that. But if you know that the established culture of your team is that we always do this reflective design where we improve the design before we start working on it, it's okay to leave that messiness in,
right,
because you will probably come back to it with better ideas than you left.
Yep.
So when I'm doing real world work, I will leave things messier than I will on like a training example, because I know when I come back to it, I'm going to make it better.
Yep.
And my brain, having had, looking at it with fresh eyes,
right,
will have a better idea of what will make this good.
Yeah, that's I don't know about you, but that's hard for me to do. I do it like in my ensembler. I have this really ugly way of figuring some stuff out. I'm like, oh, I should refactor it, but it's like, it works. It's fine. It's a little uglier than I'd like, but yeah.
And it is harder to do that when you're sharing stuff with the world, because people, the internet, people are nasty on the internet, and they see stuff. And
they have opinions. Yep.
Without understanding the context. So anyway, let's look at this. So we've got start game as an endpoint. We're going to tell the game service to start, roll the dice. We're going to roll the dice, roll result. And so that just redirects to roll result. So at roll result, I see those are both posts. Yeah.
Right. So these are so post to the start game, that starts the game, and that it's the post redirect get pattern of web apps is right. So we process the command, then we redirect, so the browser will do a get against the roll result. So it gets the current state at that point.
Yeah. And of course, the reason we do that is because when you refresh the page, you don't want to get that little,
yes,
you have to resend the form content,
which is not what you want.
No. So then we add current score to model. That's not the domain model. That's the view model.
Right.
Add attribute. There must be some wacky dependency injection stuff going on here, because I don't know where the current score is coming from. Okay, you're getting it from the game service.
Right. Yeah, so there's a little bit of different levels of abstraction going on here.
I would probably do it like this, just to make that more clear. But I think there's also, I don't know if you're seeing what I'm typing here. Yeah. But that's not really a major design issue. That's just sort of a personal preference thing. Then they get the current hand. Yeah. Asking questions to the game service, blah, blah, blah. Score category dot values. That is your enum, right? Yeah, that's your category name.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, this is all making a lot of sense to me.
Hey there, Tukes. Considering Java as your go-to, I think the future of Java is bright, but I always say pick a language that you like, that your org or team or whatever group you're involved in is going to use. Not sure about features, there's stuff coming up on there. Suiji asks about make trade-offs that help with the current task at hand, knowing that the next task might require different trade-offs. I know that's the way I think about it, is always this idea of, unless I know I need to change it now, and then I have to work within whatever I know and whatever my constraints are, procrastination sort of works. It's like, well, I'll know more when I actually need to implement it. And it might be that leaving it a little bit messy means that I'm not refactoring towards something that I may end up having to undo or change direction completely. And Dota to Attitude, I am definitely against refactoring as a stated task. I find, I remember earlier in my career, I used to say, hey, let's refactor this for a week. I no longer do that, because sort of what I was saying earlier is I always want to have as much as possible is done as part of a feature, because again, you know why you're doing it. and you have some sense of what problem is it solving. It might just be that I can't quite squeeze this in a way I'd like, this feature. So refactoring will then sort of open up this gap that I can then plug this thing in. But just sort of randomly refactoring without any idea of what do you, right? Refactoring is improving the design of your code. How do you know it's improving it unless you have an idea of, I'm trying to do X, and if there is Z, then it would be easier to do this X, right? If I had this class, it would be easier to do this thing. And without that in mind, it's really, you're just guessing. And to me, that's almost, it's an aspect of sort of it's speculative refactoring. Is kind of the way I think about it.
I want to come back to what you were talking about with Suigi, and I want to talk about the fundamental trade-off, the fundamental truth of agile design, which is evolutionary design, which so many people don't get.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask, can you make a?
Yep.
Can you make me big? So this picture here, this shows cost over time. And traditional design gets more expensive over time.
Mm-hmm.
And with traditional design, then what you want to do is you want to make as many decisions here when they're the cheapest as possible.
Right.
It is possible to write your code in a way that's a little bit more expensive in the beginning because you're doing test-driven development. But you end up with a curve that looks like this. Mm-hmm. And this is basically XP design or evolutionary design.
Yep.
That's incremental design, reflective design, and continuous design.
Mm-hmm.
Or a lot of people call it just evolutionary design. When your curve looks like this, the later you make changes, the cheaper they are.
Yeah.
And this is real. I have data. It's in my book. I have an actual examples from my book of this curve happening. I've seen it time and time and time again over the last 23 years I've been doing this. This curve is real, but it's unbelievable to a lot of folks.
It's amazing because I have data as well. I haven't published it, but I have data as well that shows that, and just my experience is like that as well. And I think it's hard for people to believe because there's something about the cultural aspect of just programming that.
Yeah.
It is taken for granted that it's cheaper to do that. Like it's going to be expensive later, so let's do it now. That it's just baked into the Uber consciousness or whatever of that, and it's taken as, I mean, it's sort of a side thing, but like it's almost like we've learned nothing since the 60s and early 70s. When we actually have, but it seems like we haven't, because you see the ideas from then taken to now, and it's like, no, we've actually made progress.
And the other thing that people don't get is that crossover point on a greenfield system, it's about 6 weeks. It's really soon.
Yeah.
The reason this is cheaper is because when you're just hacking away, it's fun and easy, right? Mm-hmm. And you're just manually testing. But as the number of tests you have to run and as the interactions get more complex, this goes up. This is more expensive because you're writing tests, and often it takes a little bit of time to figure out how to write tests in a new technology, just like it took us a while to figure out how to test the database and figure out how to work with Spring.
Yeah. But now, like the refactoring I did took like 4 minutes because, it just worked and everything worked and it tracked everything. Exactly. I fixed one thing and it took like 30 seconds and boom, I'm done because we have 163 tests in this code base that takes so little time. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So it took us 2 hours to figure out how to work with Spring. So that's where that 6 weeks come from. That's somewhat pessimistic. So this approach absolutely pays for itself. And honestly, people doing really traditional design where you're doing a lot of upfront thinking, that's going to start way up here anyway, because like this is the hack together design path. Yeah. Where you grab a framework and you just do stuff until it works. But that is really hard for people to grasp, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Monsoon Rains, let me address your question real quick. And then I want to get back to doing the reflective design on this code, because I actually think it might be more fun to refactor than to rebuild, just to have that experience. in the spirit of, following this curve. But Monsoon, the main difference between mocks and nullables, so ultimately these are all different ways of turning off infrastructure. Now, mocks are not just a way of turning off infrastructure, they're also a design technique. And you can find that design technique in the book, Growing Object-Oriented Software, Guided by Tests. But the way they're used in practice by most people is with a mocking framework, and not as a design technique, but for turning off external systems. And so you've got mocks for doing that, you've got stubs for doing that, you've got fakes for doing that, and nullables are also a way of doing that. Mm-hmm. Mocks, stubs, and fakes are all test doubles. I had somebody call the nullables approach, glad that's the right finger. I had somebody call the nullables approach production double, which is actually a pretty good way of describing it. I like that. Yeah, it's a production double. And one of the things that you get with a production double is that you can actually use it in production. And it turns out that when you have this capability, you do find good uses for it. Mocks are fundamentally different than the way than fakes are used and nullables. Mocks and spies and sometimes stubs, depending on how they're programmed, are used for interaction-based tests, which means that we are going to test that our code under test calls certain methods on its dependencies. The problem with that now is that we write our tests, we have to know which dependencies are called and what method names are called. And so you end up writing tests that kind of feel like a duplicate of the production code. And this is where you get complaints about people locking in their design, because they can't change the design without breaking their tests, because their tests assume very specific method call names. Yeah. And this is partly because people use mocking frameworks rather than hand-rolled mocks. Again, if you go back to Steve Freeman and Nat Price's work, they get really upset about me saying test without mocks because they're thinking about doing it properly. But I'm actually talking about nullables as an alternative to what people do in practice rather than what they're recommended to be doing. So mocks and spies are a way of doing interaction-based tests, and those are really problematic because they do lock in your structure. They make it hard to refactor, and they're really noisy and hard to read. Some kinds of stubs, most fakes, and nullables all give you the opportunity to do sociable testing, which means that your tests actually test behavior rather than method calls. And so when you make refactorings, your tests don't break. That's incredibly valuable. So now it just comes down to, well, how is nullables better than a fake? The answer is that nullable uses a lot more of your production code, so they're easier to write, and they're very reusable. Stubs are not super reusable, so you have to write a lot of them. Fakes are reusable, but they're hard to write, and you've got dependency management issues. Nullables, because they are really just your production code, they require less maintenance, and they are more real than all the other alternatives. There's trade-offs to all of these things, and the trade-off with nullables is that they're production doubles, so they run in production. But I think those trade-offs are worth it because they're easier to write with fakes, and they're less work than stubs because they're more reusable than stubs, and they are more real than either one of them, so they catch more bugs. So that's the not exactly short answer to your question. Thanks for bearing with me, Ted.
Yep.
Well, Xproof, that's the whole point. You can build hand-rolled mocks, but you are still going to use specific method names, which is part of the problem I have with mocks. With interaction testing in general, I think it makes refactoring difficult. I prefer sociable tests.
Yeah.
So I was going to continue going through.
I just want to say, Xproof, if you look at my code bases, I have like my ensembler. I have some hand-rolled mocks in there. And I think it's also one thing I see in terms of people using mocks, they use it all the time. Like 70 to 80% of their tests are in mocks, or using mocks or using a mocking framework. And for me, the way I tend to use mocks is almost as a last resort. Is like, okay, I'm going to use it in one place here. And so I think that there's also a difference in terms of just how much it's used Because if it's used in one place, then especially with automated refactoring tools that I have at my disposal in Java, it's not as bad. But the stuff I've seen where it's, if you've got 300 different usages of this thing and it's relying on this method being called, and now you want to change that, now you're in a world of hurt.
Well, and you see, a while back there was this sort of famous debate between David Heinemeier Hansson, the creator of Ruby on Rails, and Kent Beck, and I think it was moderated by Martin Fowler. It's a somewhat frustrating interview because DHH has really strong opinions on things that he hasn't studied fully, and test-driven development is one of those things, unfortunately. But coming from a Ruby background and seeing a lot of mock-based tests in that Ruby environment where you don't have the refactoring tools that you have in Java, and the same is true for JavaScript. Those mock-based approaches do lead to an absolute mess. I think it's better in a system with good automated refactorings, but it still is, I think, somewhat problematic in terms of not really testing things that you think you're testing. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Hey, Suichi. Wow, has it been a month again? I guess so. Thanks for the sub.
Yeah. The thing Suichi just mentioned about both ends using mocks and the features didn't work. Yeah. I call that the test is testing itself problem.
Yes. Oh, I've seen far too many of those.
Yeah. Nullables don't have the same issue, Monsoon, because Nullables run real code all the way out to the very edges of the system. So you can still have problems where the infrastructure doesn't work the way you think it does. But what we're testing is our code, not the interaction of the infrastructure. There's other test techniques for making sure infrastructure works. Contract testing and paranoid telemetry are the two big ones. And so you just don't see those sorts of problems with Nullables. So yeah, I'm gonna continue looking through this, if that's all right with you, Ted.
Go for it.
So I think I understand what's going on with yacht controller. Seems like good code to me. The way you're using GameService is super clean. So now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move down to GameService and see, because remember, reflective design, I start out by analyzing existing code base, reverse engineering the design of the existing code, and then trying to imagine ways to make it better. And it may be that we get to the end of this exercise and I'm like, nope, no significant changes. I mean, I can do stuff like, make a minor change here, but and if that's true, then we're done. Yay. Yep. Except that we do need to introduce the nullables, I think, into the yacht controller tests. Right. I don't think you've done that yet.
Right.
Okay, so next up is GameService. Let's look at that and open up GameService. Did you follow along with me?
Yes, I did. Amazing.
Okay. So GameService, we've looked at this before. So what this is this is sort of mediating between the domain model and the database. It's your application layer. And given that you have, and I don't have a problem with this, this is basically what I would do. With the exception that this kind of irritates me.
Right. And we talked about this last time. It's like this, so there's sort of the two sort of interactions that the front end does. One is sending commands to modify stuff in the domain, and others are making queries. And so the queries, you could probably just eliminate the middleman.
And I'd probably just return
I'd be fine with that.
Game here. But the rest of it, re-rolling, we're giving it a list of dice. It's turning those into a list of integers. Die rolls, we're adding that. Die roller dot roll multiple. Yeah, so die roller, of course, that's another bit of infrastructure. So it makes sense that this is happening at the application layer. And then we're telling the game that the dice have been re-rolled. I would probably do this a little differently. So I'm gonna take a note on what I'm noticing here. And what I'm seeing here is a lack of value objects. So I would probably prefer the yacht controller passing the value objects.
Yeah, so I'm laughing because I've been talking a lot about primitive obsession lately, especially on Twitter. And when you scrolled past this, it's like, oh, we're missing a value object here.
Yeah. That's fairly minor, but yeah. So there's something. Value object, question mark. And then execute and save is private, assign role to, score category. That's the enum again, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Assign role to. Where's the role coming from? Oh, it's not role. It's really the hand, isn't it?
Yeah, so there may be a little bit of naming confusion as to what your current hand is, because if you remember, we've actually done a bunch of renames, things like current hand and so on, and some of that might not have fully propagated through.
Can we rename this to assign current hand to? Is that correct? Is that actually doing?
Let me double check. So if we go into here, yeah, so there's this variable last role, which is really the hand. Yes, and it basically says assign current. So it should be assign current hand to that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Did you make that rename?
Let me go.
I can't do it. My system doesn't have that capability.
So yeah. So let's go rename that.
And this is typical, by the way, when I'm doing this reflective design, if I see little changes that can just be automated, I'll just do them in that moment. It's sort of what Ted was talking about, like refactoring to understand. As I learn what's going on in the code base, I will refactor. And no code base is perfect. Like you will always find little things, even in very carefully designed code bases.
Yeah, and there's always, that's the thing is like, it's so easy to get caught up in like this stuff changes. Even automated refactors don't capture everything. They don't sometimes capture names of variables or even names of methods. There's a lot, or maybe terminology shifts. So it used to be called last role, and now it's called current hand because we came up with a better name. And you may or may not take the time to. It may not be worth it to go through the entire code base trying to find every single little piece. And this is where doing that kind of like, hey, I passed by this, like, let me go fix it because it'll take me 30 seconds is so important.
Yeah, and it gives you permission. Like, I think it's really important to understand as a team, you're going to find errors, naming errors, like clarity errors, design errors in your code, and you should fix them when you find them. Like, that's what collective ownership is. It's the responsibility to make changes when you see a better way. It's not the ability to, it's the responsibility to.
Yeah.
And when you as a team share that responsibility to make things better when you see the opportunity, then you can give yourselves permission to be imperfect.
Right.
And that's
absolutely
huge.
Oh my
that
gosh.
saves time.
Yeah.
When you can give yourself permission to not have a perfect design, now you can spend 80%, 20% of your time doing the 80% solution and let the rest go for later.
Yeah.
And that is such a huge time saver.
Yeah.
I see so many teams just like crush themselves trying to make things perfect, spending way too much time when they should.
That was me.
Just said,
that was me.
Just good enough, and we will make it better in the future.
Let me spend 30 minutes trying to figure out the best method name here.
Yeah.
And what kills me is when I talk to teams, and it's like, yeah, we need all pull requests or code submission, what they're using, to be tied to like a Jira ticket or whatever. And I'm like, oh my God, like they put so many barriers in the way to make these kinds of small but important refactoring changes. They make it so hard so nobody does it. And they wonder why the code becomes so hard to work with. It's like, well, you're impeding people from doing the right thing.
And along with that is every commit has to be very targeted. But when you say that, you're saying that you can't do the refactorings as you come across them.
Exactly.
And now they're not going to happen.
And they're just not going to happen.
Yeah.
People are guided by what they're incentivized or de-incentivized, whatever the word is.
What they're judged on.
Yeah. And
regardless of whether there's money associated with it, it's if I'm going to feel judged for doing rename refactoring at the same time as I'm adding a feature, they're not going to do the rename refactoring. And it's going to be the very rare person who's going to stash, rename, and then unstash.
Yeah.
Which is how I prefer to do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Well, if I feel a need to keep my commit history clean,
Right.
which I don't really feel that much need to,
Yeah.
you can do it by stashing your current thing, making the change, and then unstashing. And if I find a change that's I do a refactoring and it's going to like change a whole bunch of files and make the history harder to understand, I might do that. But most of the time, I'm just going to do it when I come across it.
And to me, it comes back to the idea of refactoring is coding. It's to say that refactoring, I'm going to code and then I'm going to refactor, to me is nonsensical, because refactoring is coding. We are changing code. We are adding, to me, especially adding meaning to it or refining the meaning, like we just did with renaming last roll to current hand. It's like that is just it's just coding. And if you say that no, I'm going to leave that for my refactoring time, it to me it dilutes the power of refactoring. Like, and I always, it's like coding is continuous refactoring, that kind of thing, that kind of feel is like you're just always doing it. And because you're learning, software development is learning. And as you learn, like Suiji says, like it would be a waste to throw away or to hoard in your head that learning and not put it back in the code. I think that's almost a criminal act to hold on to it and not put it back in the code.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So let's keep on going through this.
Yep.
So we've got the list of, so we got assign current hand 2. Are you still scrolling with me?
It looks that way. We're on camera roll. Yeah.
We've had this break so many times on us. I'm just going to keep checking with you. So yeah, scored categories. Presumably that's just another accessor. The nice thing about pulling these accessors out is I think this would actually make GameService much easier to understand in terms of what is it actually, where's the meat? Because there's only 3 or 4 things that it's really doing. So I'm going to add that as pull accessors out of GameService. Question mark. All these are coming down with question marks. Okay, so the next thing is GameService relies on games. So let's take a look at that. And I have a suspicion that I'm going to keep to myself because if I'm wrong, it'll derail us. But I wonder about something. Okay, so game comes from a snapshot. That's fine. It gives us the dice that have been rolled. What does that mean, dice rolled? Is this another current hand type of thing?
That is basically saying here's take the roll, take the dice have been rolled and this is now your new hand.
Oh, okay. So that I find really weird. That's a start a new round type of thing, right?
That yes, is start a new round. Yeah.
Okay. So that one we might want to starts a new round. That I find really confusing.
I agree.
Okay. Dice re-rolled. What does that mean?
So that's when you pick which ones to keep and you've re-rolled some of them. So this is the new hand.
Okay. And where are these hand of dice coming from?
They're coming from either this one comes from, as we saw in the service where it says, give me a whole new hand. The reroll takes reroll. So if we go back to GameService, it rerolls whatever has not been kept.
Okay. Oh, right. Because of course, to make this a pure logic class, we're having to get the dice in because the dice are random.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so what I suspected might be true looks like it might be true. So dice re-rolled. Right. So both of these are weird because they expect random dice to come in. So dice, the the next roll in the dice re-rolled is the next roll in the current hand, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Then current hand is just an accessor. Score, name's good though. Score is an accessor, delegates to the scoreboard. Scoreboard is where you do all the real like calculation logic, right?
Yep.
If I recall.
Yep.
Assign current hand to score category. That's just delegating, but it also says the round's been completed. Require hand, that's a private thing. Scored categories is an accessor, can reroll, saying whether or not the round's been completed. How do we know if the round has been completed? Where does round completed get set? Here it is, assign current hand to. So that's weird. I would expect there to be some domain logic there. Where is, and by the way, when I say that's weird, it's really easy. And I mean, I'm hoping that you're not feeling put upon, Ted, but it's really easy in this sort of environment where one person wrote the code and then the other person's reviewing it. It's really easy to feel judged.
No, I mean, it's interesting because I haven't looked at this level of detail at this code in months. And so partially it's like, oh, that's confusing. What the hell is that?
Yeah. And that's sort of what it's weird is. It's weird.
Right. It's like what's going on?
It's not wrong, but it doesn't make sense. So yeah.
So here it's saying assign current hand to a category is one definition of the round being completed. When you've assigned the hand and say, I'm saying it's sixes, the round is completed. So that's what this is saying.
Right. But what's weird to me is, and again, weird is like, something here doesn't make sense, and either it's because my understanding is wrong or the domain could be more clear, but both are equally possible.
Right.
And I just want to call out Suiji's comment about Mike Hill saying you are not your code.
Yeah.
That is a really good thing to keep in mind, and still it can be hard. So
it can definitely be hard. Yes. I mean, it's
gentle.
As creators, which is what we are when we're writing code, we are creators. We of course will identify with that. It's mine. It's my creation. Therefore, it's an extension of me. And so one of the most valuable things people can do is try to separate yourselves from your code. And one thing that I find useful is actually doing this kind of exercise. Go back to an old piece of code that you haven't looked at in a while. Look at it with basically fresh eyes, because we forget. That's the way our brains work. And think about it. It's like, do you understand it? Would you do it differently? And likely the case is one of those two is going to be yes. And so you'll start, giving yourself a break. And I think that's really important.
Forgive yourself.
Yeah.
Forgive yourself and forgive other people.
Exactly.
Like earlier we were talking about empathy.
Exactly. And it helps if you can do that for yourself, because then you can say, oh, you're just like me, and we're all the same in that way. And we should be compassionate and kind about these things.
Yeah. You cannot improve code if you cannot give yourself permission to have bad code.
Right. Yeah.
Because all code is bad. By definition, all codes. So ones and zeros are not bad. Ones and zeros either work or they don't work. But design is about making those ones and zeros comprehensible and changeable for the human. And all design is fit for some purposes and not fit for others.
Right.
And the question isn't, is this design good or bad as an objective truth?
Right.
The question is this design good or bad for what I'm trying to do right now? And if it's not good for what you're trying to do right now, it doesn't mean that you are a bad person or even that you made a mistake.
Right. Right.
But even if you did make a mistake, that's okay. That is okay.
That's totally fine.
Give yourself permission to be imperfect, and give the people around you permission to be imperfect. Don't worry about who did a good job and who did a bad job. Just think about what can we do differently now to make this more fit for the current purpose that we have.
Yeah. So Monster and Rain says something I want to call out. It's impossible not to feel judged in a code review. And I think that's wrong. It may be really hard, especially depending on how the other person is sort of leading the review. But it is something that can be learned over time, but is not sort of the natural way the natural stance is to feel judged. But I think exactly what James has been saying, it's like saying that in fact, I remember the Prime Directive by Norm Kurth, talking about retrospectives. It's like, we did the best thing we knew how to do at that time with the information we had and the resources available. Like, we tried our best. And we will make mistakes, or maybe what looked like mistakes in retrospect, or maybe they were mistakes, but that's part of being human. And when you judge others, and you're always judging others, you tend to judge yourself. And so I think you can start there.
And I think the personality trait of programmers swings heavily towards being judgmental.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Judge the code, not the people. And on that note, do we want to take our first break, Ted?
Yep, let's do that.
All right. Well, when we get back, we'll continue studying game.java, and I've got some ideas that are a little radical.
Oh.
So.
All right. Stay tuned, folks.
Right. See you soon.
All right. And we're back.
Okay. So yeah, let's continue looking through this, but I'm seeing something here that looks interesting. So we've got assign current hand 2, we've got scored categories, can reroll, round completed. So there's an interesting interaction here between round completed, which I would expect to be a domain model concern, but it's actually being mediated by the person who calls assign hand to category. And that's actually happening way down in the UI level. So the decision about when is the round over happens in yacht controller somewhere. Where is that at? Where is that at, Ted?
Right here. You're talking about this?
Are we still linked? I am no longer following you for some reason, but you're able to follow me, right?
Yeah, I can follow you. Yeah, so it's in yacht control line 63.
Yeah, I'm no longer seeing you. I might have to reconnect into your. Okay, yeah. So this is where the determination that the round is over happens. They select the category. Yeah. And then we ask the game if it's over.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something about you have a certain number of rerolls.
Right. So that's mediated by the can reroll. So you get to the point where you can no longer reroll, and now you have no choice, but you now have to assign to a category because that's the only way forward.
Okay, and this is looking at roles can reroll. What's roles again?
Roles is the little class that's just keeping track of roles, how many it has left. And so it sort of encapsulates the number of roles per turn.
Yeah. And I think the confusing thing there for me is that that's not the rolls of the dice, but that's the number of throws that you can have, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Depends on how you interpret the word roll. Yeah, but yeah, it's like the roll is an overloaded term, and I've been using it all over the place, and like we know names are hard, and sometimes finding domain names for when the domain itself hasn't chosen. But yeah, maybe this is throws, not rolls. Depends on how you think about that.
I like throw counter actually. But I also, let's not change it now.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder, maybe there's an abstraction here about rounds that's missing. Do you have a rounds abstraction at all, or class for rounds?
What would that? There's no the round. I mean, the rounds are sort of. You have as many rounds. Currently, in the current implementation, there's nothing there because there's no limit on how many rounds you have.
I'm not talking about the number of rounds, but I'm talking about the logic of what happens within a round. So you get a certain number of throws, you can re-roll the dice in each round, and so forth. That's sort of that's a combination of game and rolls right now, right?
I would say it's more a combination, or at least part of it's a combination of roles and round completed, I think is the way I might think about that now. That it's sort of like game to me is like the bigger thing that consists of scoreboard, but also then the idea of like, where am I in the current round? And I agree that might be a missing abstraction.
Yeah. Maybe. Might be. Yeah. That's why I don't want to rename this one yet, because if we instead create a round abstraction, and then we can say round, are you completed? Round, how many rolls are left, or throws, or whatever we want. But again, when I'm doing this, you all can't read that, but that's when I'm doing this reflective design, you're going to find all kinds of things that could be done better, but there's only so many of them that you have time to do.
Exactly.
So I'm going to collect all the things I can find, except for the really, straightforward ones that we just do in the moment. And then we're going to come back and we'll say, okay, this is how the design works. This is where the sort of rough spots are in the design for what we're trying to do. Now, which of these is really going to make a difference for us to make the design better for what we want to do?
Right.
There's always a state machine. And then we say, is the game over? I suppose that's,
yes.
And that again delegates to the scoreboard.
Right.
I want to take a look at the scoreboard, but I guess my idea, I'm a little afraid to bring it up because I'm worried you're going to shoot it down. But the more I look at this, the more I like it. Let me just look at scoreboard first, though. So score is a score category map. So this is just doing the collection stuff, blah, 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 collection stuff. Score category is the enums. Scored category, that's where the actual logic is to do the scoring.
Well, that's sort of scoring each row. And then the scoreboard is then able to sum over all of the rows. Yeah,
the scoreboard. That's what I was looking for. Yeah. Now we've got our score categories. Yacht scorer. I'm just trying to find the logic that calculates scores. Here it is. It's happening in Yacht scorer. Okay. All right. My first reaction is that this is too clever for its own good. With scoreboard, score category, scored category, and yacht scorer sort of all interacting. But at the same time, I think we don't have to worry about it. I think we can just interact with the scoreboard and call it good. So I'm not going to sweat it. Let me just take another look at scoreboard. Yeah, I can see why you split those out, because this is pretty big as it is. Yeah. You're doing it functionally, right? You've got the names attached to a function. And when you score it, you run the function.
Right.
Yeah, it's clever. Clever code is cool and always makes me raise an eyebrow. Okay. So
it's always interesting and like it's is it too clever? I don't know. I remember writing it. And I'd have to go back to the videos, but it did not start out that way, and it was refactored and test driven towards that. It's one of those, like, sometimes, and I had this battle with myself too. Is like, this is neater, but it does require a little bit more knowledge of how to read this particular way of writing code. And there's always a trade-off between something that might be more obvious but more verbose versus something that's a bit more concise but then requires a little bit more thought. So
yeah, it's just like a lot of my reflective design is just pulling up files and like crossing my eyes and letting the code sort of roll by me. And when I look at these two things and I see how clean the interface is to them, like, you know what, that's not worth going into. But and I see that there's about the same amount of code in each of those. If you combine them back into one, then then it's probably, mixing concerns. So actually, as I look at this, I think, well, we could be even more clever and have a function that returns a function, so we don't have to have all this repeated stuff.
That might be pushing the Java Lambda stuff a bit. I don't know.
Oh yeah,
I'd have to look at that.
Okay, so here's what I'm seeing here, Ted. I'm seeing a lot of coupling between game service and game, and I'm seeing that all the real logic is being done by the delegates. So what I want to do is I want to combine game service and game into one class, make it an application level class.
So I want to point out that if there are multiple games and or multiple simultaneous games, I'm not sure how that's going to work.
Yeah, I think that's a swingism or springism that you're dealing with there, because I'm not saying so. So either game combines into game service or game service combines into game, but either way, it's not a global. A game represents a single game in progress right now.
Right. So I guess right now, game service is in charge of it. Game service is stateless from a domain standpoint, and so it loads up games. So what would be the code that would load up the game? Would you put that into the controller? Is that what you were thinking?
I mean, the game database loads the game.
Well, okay. Who calls the game database?
Who calls the game service?
The controller.
Yeah, so same thing.
So you'd have the controller directly talk to the game database.
Not necessarily. We might call a factory method on game service. Might be game service.load, and then that returns an instance.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
Yeah. Because I noticed that to understand this, I needed to pop back and forth between game service and game. My concern with this is that DI frameworks tend to love their service objects, and I'm worried that we're going to fight with Spring. But if we can program this so we don't fight with Spring, then I think this could be interesting.
Yeah, I don't know that we can always work around. We cross that bridge when we come to it. I think.
Yeah. Yeah, we might need to make a very classic enterprise Java thing, a game factory that Spring creates for us. And we could even call that game factory game service, but all it would do is like pull the game out of the database, and then the game would be responsible for persisting itself.
No, we do not want an abstract game factory being. Be quiet, Sushi. And you left out the word proxy.
Yeah. Well, if it isn't a factory, then is it really worth having? So before we go down that road, there's one more thing I want to look at, which is I want to look at the game yacht controller tests. And you've got 3 of them. So let me just pull them all up. Is there one of these that I should look at first? Initial roll.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's a good place to start since that is sort of the beginning of a round.
Okay. So what I'm looking at is before we start doing major refactorings, we want to have sociable tests in place, which means we should be using our nullables. So I think the first thing to do is to modify our tests to be using the nullables. And I just want to look what we have. So we already have the create null on the game service. I don't see it use the database though. It's using
right. That was the change we didn't make yet.
Yeah. But are these tests using the nullable game service?
This one is.
Yeah, that's good.
I think they all are. I think we propagated that change.
Okay.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah.
I think the trick is going to be right now your in-memory game database is a fake.
Yes.
And we're going to be using the nullables, which do not have the same kind of logic that the that the fake does. So we're going to have to actually modify our test to the ones that depend on certain results to come back. We're going to have to modify our test to support that.
Okay. I don't think there's any.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't.
It looks like I
don't think they rely on the fake so much in terms of like, I don't think any of them are querying the fake, which is where you might be concerned.
Yeah.
So I think we're okay.
Let's go ahead and check in the change we made. We did a rename.
Yeah.
And then let's just replace the factory with the Nullable database and see what breaks. And then we'll use that to tell us what we need to change.
So what else do we do?
Sweegie, yes, we do test that once we write data to the database, that it can be read back. We test that in the game database. I think you're asking, are there any tests that rely on reading data back at the controller level? Yeah, if there isn't, I'll be a little surprised. Probably a gap. And if there is, then that's something that will probably stop working. I agree.
Yeah, so that's what I was just mentioning. Is what we're not reading back from the fake in these yacht controller tests, at least. The service test might be.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Because the service is the one that's mediating the conversation with the database.
Right.
So yeah, let's go ahead and change that on line 60. I'm going to turn control back over to you.
All right.
Because my code together has stopped following you.
Oh no.
Or actually, yeah, the little box that goes at the bottom has gone away.
Oh.
So the one that says you are driving on your screen, I don't have.
Oh, you don't have that anymore. It's gone. Oh no.
I'll reconnect.
Okay.
But in the meantime, I think you can just go ahead and change line 60 on the right there and see what happens.
So this will be game.
Oh, that's the wrong one.
Oops.
Well, that should have been the real thing. Yeah, so line 74.
I don't know that I think when I added the persistence, I don't know that I actually propagated it to the production application. Because the server was always up, so you know.
Yeah, that's good enough.
That's fine, good enough.
Line 70, I'm happy with it. Ship it. Let's just modify line 74 then.
Database.
And once we get this working, then we can have confidence that the other one should work too.
Yeah, so we can't use new GameService. Or we can't pass this in because GameService requires a game repository, so we'd have to change that as well.
So that is going to have to be a game database.
So that's not too bad. So this will have to be a game database as well.
While you're looking into that, Ted, I'm going to try to reconnect code together.
Here. Well, this is going to have to be something, so.
Yeah, might as well make it database gamedatabase.create. That should automatically work if the dependency injection framework is working properly.
Do we not have a create on game database?
Oh, I think it's just new game database. We decided not to do a .create because of the dependency injection.
What does it require? It requires a database JPA. So then this has to be fed in. Let's see. This has to be passed in as a parameter to create. So yeah, so here, oops, we're going to need
okay. Looks like it following his code together is working for the moment.
So pass that in, change that, and this, that propagates, and so we call it save game, new game dot. I want to rename that.
Oh, right. This is actually using completely different code now.
So we can replace this.
Should be GameDatabase.load, right?
Yeah. Load game. And it throws an exception, which we don't handle.
All right. This is starting to feel like too big of a change to do all at once, because we've got that game corrupted exception, which we're probably not handling yet.
Yeah, so now we got to figure out how what we want to do with that. We could just throw it and let the controller deal with it.
I think the controller is the only one that can deal with it, because just for those of you who don't remember, our game database throws a game corrupted exception, which occurs when it discovers that it can't load the game because of bad data in the database. And we throw that exception to force the UI to present some sort of message back to the user. So the controller seems like the right place to handle that and present that message back.
Oh, and load game returns an optional, so I'm going to cheat and just say .get. What is it? And then
and it returns optional because we may not have a database.
Right. And this needs that. Oh, it's probably not. Oh, yep. Okay. I feel like I want to create a method. And then this is just okay. So that took care of that.
You can delete those comments at the top, by the way.
Yeah. So now the trick is, what have we broken?
Well, the controller's going to be unhappy about exception handling.
Yeah. It's all that. So I think at least in here, I'm just gonna do that. And then the other controller should be unhappy. And then, oh, did I miss that? Right, and so now we've got incompatible types for places that are using that. Right. So this becomes game database.
No, that should just be GameService.createNull.
Oh, right. And can we pass in?
I do not recall what our create null options are.
Let's take a look. So we got nulled responses for the average score and the die roller.
There's Game Corrupted.
So that should be fine. That should be fine.
Okay, good. Game Corrupted is a checked exception because even though we're not doing it yet, we are supposed to be catching them and resolving them at the controller level. Yeah, this is less a this refactoring is definitely making me uncomfortable. It's an awfully big step. We're definitely changing behavior. I'm sort of want to say, well, let's see what happens and where we got it, and then let's reset and try again.
All right.
In smaller steps.
Yeah. Yeah. So the two big changes were the database we're replacing it with has a completely different interface than the one it had before. So we could have aligned those better. The exception was a big thing. Mm-hmm. So the null responses. Okay. I'm like, how do I create a null responses? Null responses, new, and then with die rolls.
All sixes?
Yeah. And we care
about... Surprised we didn't do this one already. I thought we had gone through and made a lot of these changes once before.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we changed this. We never, and here, but we never came back. I don't think we ever went through all the game service ones and handled changed them all to be create null.
I think you're right. We were supposed to make game service private and update all these things, but I don't think we ever did.
So it's the variable. That's good enough. And then, what makes me uncomfortable is I haven't been able to run tests, and that makes me nervous. That's fine. We'll just throw exception.
Yeah, we've definitely my one of my inner barometers for am I on the right track is can I run tests whenever I want.
Exactly.
And once that timer starts going past a couple of minutes, I start feeling nervous, and we've definitely crossed that boundary.
Yeah.
And we've all been there. Like we've all had this experience. The trick is to
notice and back up
and then say, okay, let's stop. And I think we are going to want to stop. It's just, I think there's some things that are potentially can be learned from seeing what happens when we finish going through this. Yeah, so I'm seeing three refactorings we need to do incrementally, Ted. I'm seeing make game service, new game service private.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing handle the game corrupted exception, and I'm seeing replace the in-memory game database.
Here. So it's not new game service. Game service to create now. Okay. And then those other two are just unhandled exceptions. And
this is just exceptions.
Yep.
Oh no.
And unsurprisingly, a bunch of tests are failing.
Yeah. View controller web tests. Failed to load application context.
Yeah, so there, it couldn't find a GameDatabase JPA to...
So it's not using the null then.
So that should have been injectable.
What else do we have failing? Is that it? Just the view controller?
No, we've got... Well, these tests are failing. Yeah, they're not.
Are those exceptions? Is that what the X means?
The X means the test failed versus an exclamation point, which is an exception was thrown. So these couldn't basically even run. These ran and failed.
Okay. And is it all view controller? Or do we have anything else that's...
Let me see. Yeah, so all the controller tests are failing because of something not set up right with the dependency injection. And we have something that's our nullable.
That may be the lack, the game database not returning what it thinks it's going to return.
Mm. Right. So here it's clearly using those nulled values as opposed to what was specified.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the same thing. Actual being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yep. And here it's just completely missing, which is a spy issue.
Okay. Yeah. So let's reset.
All right. That's not what I wanted. That's what I wanted. I want to point out that this is something that I know I still don't do often enough of, like, you were doing a spike. We may not have realized we were doing a spike, but we were doing a spike. When you do a spike, roll back. Like we've learned stuff, like you said, it's like, oh, we've learned this and take notes of that. Like, do a spike to learn what are the impacts of this thing. Oh, I thought it was going to be small, and it turns out 20 minutes later you finally figured out all the things. And
and it's never fun.
No,
particularly not when you're on camera. I did this. So I did this in front of a fairly large audience for a new client for half an hour. And I kept doubling down. Oh, it's just a little bit more, just a little bit more.
Just one more.
And then half an hour later, I could not get it to work. And I was like, time to reset. And that's when I discovered that we were having trouble with the repository as well. So absolute disaster of refactoring demonstration. I did not create confidence in my abilities at all. This was back in 2006, so I can talk about it and not cry as much. Incredibly embarrassing. And the lesson I learned from that was notice when you've done too much and you're not able to run the tests, and back up. This is really hard to do.
Yeah, and this is where I wish writing plugins for IntelliJ was easier. I've written them, and they're horrible to write. Where it would be like, it has been 5 minutes since you compiled successfully. Do you want to continue? It's been 10 minutes. Do you want to continue? It's been 15 minutes. We're stopping and we're rolling back.
I have actually, I've gone through, I've got this 11-year-old code base that I've talked about, and sometimes I do these major refactorings on it. And I've gone through several rounds of this. Oh, I think I'm going to do this. And so I start on it and I'm refactoring and I get the tests into a broken state. And I think, oh, I'm just going to go through the tests and solve them. And I can't. And so I'm like, okay, undo. I'm going to take a smaller piece, now start on it.
Right.
And the same thing has happened. Like, I've actually bitten off a smaller piece and failed, and then bitten off a smaller piece and failed. And then you just keep
slicing.
Keep backing up, try again. And that's what we're going to do here. So we're working now, right?
I roll back. Let me run my test just to be sure.
Yeah.
Should be. And yes, we are.
So I think we did have multiple things going on there. It wasn't just replace the in-memory database. I think the one that's the lowest hanging fruit on that is let's make GameService private.
Right. So let's take this out
again.
Well, it's one of those was like, oh, it's such a shame that I did that, but what's nice, what I think, this idea of backing up and like this whole idea of spikes to me was such a novel idea when I first learned about it back in like 2000. And this idea that you're going to throw code away is somehow abhorrent. It's like, it's, again, that sort of investment in code. It's like, no, the typing is never the bottleneck. It's what did you learn and making sure that you don't forget what you just learned. So I'm glad you were taking notes.
For a lot of programmers and a lot of managers, the entire mental model of how software developed is incorrect.
Yeah.
This is not a factory.
No.
We are not throwing away good chocolates when Lucy doesn't wrap the chocolate.
Showing our age.
Yeah. I did not see I Love Lucy when it was live, but my sister absolutely loves I Love Lucy, so we have it all. And of course, there's a very famous I Love Lucy episode where she's working in the factory and she's wrapping chocolates, and the conveyor belt starts going too fast.
Faster.
And so she starts like picking them up and putting in her pockets and putting in her mouth and like just trying to keep up. That's not the model of programming. The model of programming is not chocolates in one end, wrapped chocolates out the other. Model of programming is in your brain. That's where the construction happens.
Right.
Throwing away code does not throw away the progress you've made because the progress is in your brain. And it is so much better to throw away crap code and make good code with your new understanding than it is to double down on the crap code and try to push on through.
Right.
But a lot of the stuff we've been talking about today has all been related to this.
Yeah.
We're here to be at the factory and pump out, code from the code mines as fast as possible. No, that's not right. Our job is to turn ideas into functionality. Code is incidental to that process.
Yeah. And like I said, software development is learning. And the more people, this is why I like ensembles, because then it's group learning, which is even better. But even as individual or pair, it's like it's learning. And as long as you don't immediately forget what you just did, like, so it helps when somebody's actually taking notes while somebody else is, this is where pairs and groups come in handy. I
got multiple cards of notes here.
As long as you don't forget that, as long as you don't forget the learning, then the code is just incidental. Yeah. Yeah. And again, sort of GPA with his rework avoidance theory is very much related. It's like,
I don't think I've seen that one of his. He's so good at this sort of stuff, though.
Yeah, the many more much smaller steps. Rework avoidance is why people don't take small steps. It's like it's going to be more efficient if I take a big step. It's like it might be if you get it right, might be, and get it completely right. But it really is a lot better if you just take smaller steps. But sometimes you don't know. This is where I always tell people in TDD is like, we're going to practice smaller steps. You're likely not going to take these tiny, tiny, super tiny steps in reality, but it's good to know how to do it when you need to, because like you were saying, it's like you slice it, it's still not small enough. Slice it, still not small enough. Knowing how to slice really small helps then in those cases when you have to.
And if you've got really good build, which is hard, but if your build is taking less than a second, then you absolutely want to take those small steps.
Right.
Because, I put a huge amount of work in my builds to get them down to less than a second so that I can get effectively instant feedback when I save. And I'm taking incredibly small steps.
Right, exactly.
Because it's really powerful. When you're taking such small steps, when you make mistakes, which I make mistakes all the time, the solution is almost always obvious. And that is so productive. Because, of course, the risk and uncertainty and schedules comes from debugging.
Right. Yes. The unknown, how long is this going to take? 10 minutes go by, an hour goes by, 3 hours goes by, and you're making very little progress in a debugger. And
I hate debugging. Debugging is hell. I love programming. I hate debugging, so I take really small steps and then I don't debug.
Yeah, I don't debug either.
Yeah.
At least not my own code.
But that doesn't mean we don't make mistakes, as we've just seen. So we're going to make this game service private, maybe package protected, because sometimes in the game service test, it's useful to call the
well, let's see. Where is it called? It's not called in too many places. I think I'd like to make it private.
Okay, let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the create null interface will be designed for the consumers of game service, and sometimes the tests need to get into the constructor so they can set up their dependencies, the nullable dependencies.
I think, and it might, I'm not sure. So there's these usages. We can jump to those. So
those
here, what's that?
So those are all tests, aren't they? Are
These
those the only usages?
These are the only usages of the constructor.
And those are all game service tests.
And they are all game service tests, correct?
Yeah.
Because I think we converted most of the stuff. Well, that's just the regular create. Most of the other places that we're using it are using the create nulls.
Okay. Well, that's good. That makes this a easier change.
Yeah. All right, let me close some of this. So this one, create game service with average scores. We have the average scores. So let's go.
So I think that does need to be. I think we've done this already. I think so. Suiji says the constructor was already packaged private. I think that's something that we did intentionally previously, and I think all we need to do is.
Yeah, it was.
I think that was actually correct. The way it was before.
Okay. So then we just want to change. So then when we do the change, that we just want to do this.
Yeah. But before that, we need to deal with a game corrupted exception.
Right. So yeah. So that one. Okay. I'm not actually sure why we left it. I think we could have pushed it to create null, but we can put that aside. That's fine.
Well, again, I think we may have started with create null, but often, yeah, we probably could have pushed that to create null, because with die rolls of, that's something that create null.
Yeah. I don't think there's anything that we're doing. There's nothing we're doing here that we couldn't push. This one, same thing, because it's just.
Let's go ahead and leave it though, because again, the tests of something that's nullable typically won't use the nullable interface presented to the external clients, because we're going to need to have finer grained control of our game services dependencies in our game service tests. And even though if that's not true now, it will probably be true once we start doing tests of the game repository or the game database.
Okay. So then, all right. So then that stays as is.
All right. So the next thing we need to deal with is the game corrupted exception. We started throwing that all over the place. And this sort of ties in with the in-memory database. What we need to do is incrementally get that. We can't just do a big bang switchover because the knock-on effects were too big.
Right.
Can we modify the in-memory database incrementally to match the interface of our new game database? Gradually move it over, maybe even have our in-memory game database delegate to the nullable game database? And then inline
let's see. So there's not a lot here.
That's good.
So it's already dealing with a snapshot. We could totally delegate to the nullable game database. Let me open that up. So we could substitute. That would be relatively straightforward, and then we could see what expectations it has that aren't met by game database.
Okay. Let's modify the method names at the game repository. Do we have any other implementation of game repository right now?
No.
Okay, so let's inline in memory game data repository into game repository.
So we want to get rid of the interface. Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I rarely do that. Let's see. How would we do that?
Yeah, Suiji, that's exactly what I was thinking. If we add it one at a time, that will decrease our blast radius.
Pull members up. It's not quite. Can I inline the interface?
We tried to do that once, and I think we succeeded, but I think you might. Yeah, there it is.
Inline all reference to. Did that really do it? I guess so. It did. Although, I guess the name doesn't matter because it isn't.
It doesn't matter that much
because it is in memory, so it's not lying.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we might as well just leave that as is. Yeah. I kind of want to commit again though because that was a very big change.
Yeah. I just want to run tests. Okay, so everything compiles. We run actually the. Yeah, that's all good. So let's do commit. I think these others were just formatting cleanups. So, okay, good.
Okay. Now I'd like to rename save and find to match game databases names.
I believe that's right. Okay. All right. We had save game that takes a snapshot and load game that returns an optional. So this is let's start by saying this is load game.
Okay. Now let's modify save game to take the snapshot.
All right. So introduce parameter. That's one of my favorite refactorings. Introduce parameter.
That was cool.
It just does the right thing.
Yeah. No, I've been living in the JavaScript world for too many years now, and I'm jealous of what you're able to do here.
All right, so that was fine.
And same thing here. We want to return
this one's a bit trickier because we're changing the return type. So
actually, before we do that, can we modify save game to return void?
Modify save game to return void. We can try.
I believe that's the behavior of our game database.
Yeah, we can. In fact, it's telling us that nobody's using it anyway, so that's safe enough. In fact, so we can say make method void. Done.
And we can remove line 10 entirely.
Yeah. Oh, it did the side effects.
I was worried about that one. I thought that would have some side effects.
That's all cool.
Are you committing again?
Yeah, I'm just committing again.
Signatures, API.
All right. So load game. Let's see.
Can we introduce? So we could introduce a new method that load game calls and then inline it.
Yeah. So that's. Let's see how many calls are there. That's not too bad. So we can basically say this is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding how the automatic refactorings work. Oh, we can't have. Yeah. That would help if I put my fingers on the right keys. That should still work, right?
Yes.
Oh, it's optional.
Whoops.
I left out a semicolon or a parenthesis. Right. So the optional we have to deal with.
That's
a bigger deal.
The bigger, well, if we're saying that we're okay with callers just calling get on it immediately, it's not terrible.
I'm really not okay with that.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that was.
So that's not just a refactoring, then that's a behavior change. So
yeah.
Yeah.
So so this is supposed to be an option of game snapshot, isn't it?
Right. Option all. Oh, right.
Is it optional?
Yeah. No. Sorry. Yeah. And then we need to do of.
Got it. So that should be exactly the same.
Yep.
Okay. So let's rename load game to load game old and load game new to just load game. And then I think what we need to do is we need to manually go through and find every caller and add a test for the missing case.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, wait. To put tests around this, we're going to have a way of controlling what the game database returns. I think we might be missing a way of having our nullable game database return nothing.
Have it return. Oh, when the optional is empty.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Got create null and the subbed as default. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just going to add that to my list.
Yeah.
So we need a game database.
So we need another one instead of as default as empty or something like that.
Yeah. Create empty null.
Yeah.
I think before we do that, I think we should go ahead and check this in.
All right.
And then I think we should start aligning in-memory game repository. We should start encapsulating game database so we can start using it like the game database. Or we can add the game database.create empty null, whichever one you think is better.
Sorry, what were the options again?
Either we continue making in-memory game repository mirror and wrap game database, so we can eventually inline it, or we set it aside for a moment. We go in and we add the thing we're missing on game database, the create empty null.
I don't have a strong feeling either way.
Let's go ahead and modify game database.
All right.
I feel like it's a bit of a sidetrack, but I think it'll be hard for us to make progress on a in-memory game repository without doing that. So where's our game database tests?
Right there, game database tests.
So we should have scroll up a little bit. Null game provides default game, null load game provides configured game. And then let's add right below that, null load game provides no game. Missing game.
Do you want that here in the middle?
I think at the afterwards, actually.
After the corrupted or after the configured?
After the line 267.
Okay, that's what I thought. So we want
null load game
load
provides something. Empty game.
Empty.
Or no game.
I like empty because it's what the optional talks about.
Mm-hmm.
Although empty game sounds weird.
Missing game?
Maybe no game is better.
Yeah. You'll need to throw an exception off of that one.
Yeah.
And then we should be able to just say line 261. Except instead of create null, it should be create empty null.
We're going to assert that the loaded game snapshot. Create this first. It's empty.
Perfect.
Yes, I know. I just wrote the null. Sorry. It's like, what are you trying to tell me?
Okay, that should fail, right?
So that, yeah. Well, certainly this will fail.
Right.
Because null is not empty. What?
Are you running? You aren't running your.
I'm not running all the tests.
Yeah.
And that's why I was surprised. Let me just run all of these tests. Yes. It failed because GameDatabase is null. Yeah.
And then line 43 on the right, you could probably return just create null. And then it will fail properly.
Yeah, it's just not empty. Yeah.
And then stub JPA dot as empty.
It's returning. Why is it?
Yeah, we're gonna have to have that return an optional rather than a. Oh, it's returning an optional game row. Yeah, we're storing the game row, but we need to store an optional game row, and then otherwise it'll be perfect.
I'm just confused why it said game snapshot when it should be returning a stub JPA.
Sorry, I didn't see that.
So
this
is just the wrong return type. That's why I was confused.
Oh, okay.
And so then this should return. But we're not gonna be able to do that, right?
Yeah. Can I do something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we got a whole bunch of things we got to do here. This needs to become optional. And this needs to become optional. And this needs to become game row. And then this needs to become optional and optional, optional, and optional of. Is that right?
Yes.
And optional of. And
wait. I think these are not right.
Well, I got some syntax issues.
Well, you changed the return type of the as default and as configured to return the optional game row, but that's supposed to return the stub JPA.
You're right. I don't know what I was thinking.
So I can change those back. Yep, that's better. So that's stubbed. That's optional of. That's optional of.
Here's the missing optional of. Okay. Did I get it all?
Why isn't it like this? That one.
That should be new game database.
Yeah.
That's why it inferred the return type incorrectly.
That's why. All right.
And then after this, we should take our next break.
All right, I'll pass. Let me run all the tests just to be sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right, great.
Okay. So yeah, let's commit this, and then we'll go back to in-memory game repository and continue modifying it to wrap game database so we can eventually get rid of it. No, really, it's GameDatabase.create null can return an empty. .create null.load, or just add GameDatabase.create an empty null. That's what we did.
Empty null just sounds so weird.
It is weird, and I don't love this convention we have of having multiple factories for different cases. I think that's wrong, but I think it's okay for what we've got.
Yeah, I think when we had 1 or 2 it was fine, but yeah, now that we've got 4, there's clearly missing something.
I agree.
All right, let's take a coffee break, and we'll be right back. All right, we're back.
All right, where were we? Okay, yeah, so we're done with game database. We've got the create empty null on it. And again, I think next time we look at this, we might want to think of a better way of doing those. Actually, hold on 1 second. Why do we have game database.create empty null on here twice? That's because code together's
Did the code together die?
Has lost the thread again.
Oh.
That's all right. We'll just, I think there's not a lot of need for me to type anymore, so. So yeah, I think we're done with game database. Let's go back to in-memory game repository. And now we can go through and find the uses of load game old and modify them to call the new load game. Okay. So we've got a sort of fundamental design issue here, because execute and save is doing a load and save every time, but the game may not exist.
Right.
And we know there's a hidden invariant, which is that we assume that this, because we've called new game at some point, the game does exist. But that's makes me nervous to program that hidden invariant in. Where is that create? It's up a little bit, right? Start.
Yeah, it's right here at start.
And we can't really propagate the optional here, because, for example, assign current hand to can't return an optional. Like that would make controllers' lives miserable.
Yeah, I think any command methods, anything that would, if you're trying to execute a command against a game that it couldn't find or couldn't load, that's just a bad state that nobody can fix. That I think you'd have to report that to we'd have to hand that back up somehow.
So what I would do if I wasn't using Spring and if I was doing A-frame architecture is I would have a top-level method that basically said, respond to a request. That would call GameDatabase.load, create a game that was capable, an application level game that was capable of persisting itself, and pass that game through. Now the invariant is made explicit. We only have a game if there's a game, right? I think the reason this is a problem here is because GameService is stateless, but we have implicit state.
Well, I mean, one thing we could do is we could say here, optional or else new game, which would implicitly start the game. Since start doesn't really do anything other than create the game, we could do that. That would be a different assumption, which is if we can't find it, it must be because we didn't create it, which when we only, in this case, only have the one game, I think that's okay.
Yeah, but it would definitely be a problem. Like this whole thing would fall apart if we had a game ID that we were propagating through, because we'd have to actually pass the game ID on every single call.
Right. Which is the typical way that I write the services, is that you basically say, execute this command against this ID or with these IDs, depending on the situation.
I see, because of course that's going to be in the controller as a query or a form
exactly
or something, or it's going to be on the session. You might have your game service pull it out of the session.
Right.
I think that's actually a really good compromise, is just say, because that's the advantage of having the game corrupted exception, which we also have to deal with.
Yes.
But we'll deal with, let's cross that bridge next.
Yeah.
Because if we have that one, we'll just propagate. We'll propagate the game corrupted exception.
Yeah.
But yeah, if we don't see the game, it's because the game was never created. And so here's another option for you, Ted. We could make our assumption explicit by using a runtime assertion. And I actually might like that better. We can fail fast. We can basically say, look, if you're ever calling execute and save and their game doesn't exist, something has gone horribly wrong somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing about doing load game that returns an optional is we can either say, or else create a new game and say, well, there wasn't one, so we'll give you a default one. Or we can throw an exception right away. Yeah, I agree, Suichi. Creating on demand feels very much like papering over some underlying bug.
Yeah, no, I think it's a design flaw in the way this is currently structured. But I also think that this is the intermediate step. You know, sometimes when you refactor, you make things a little uglier before you make them cleaner. What we've really done here is that ugliness always existed.
Yeah, I mean, it was there was a baked-in assumption with my implementation of the game repository that there must be a game. There is only one game. You could never not find it, which is clearly
not
fine for a prototype, but clearly not realistic.
Yeah. I think let's go ahead and continue with that assumption. I would love to have programmed it into tested it and done with that, but that's baked really heavily into the current structure. And I don't love. We could throw an exception. But now we've got a potential race condition, and somebody starts playing a game, the database gets wiped, and then we get a 500 error if the game is erased?
Well, if you throw an exception and you don't handle it at the top level, and it'll bubble up to be 500. Yeah.
Now let's throw. This is just something that needs to be fixed. So. I don't think there is actually a behavior preserving change here, Suiji. because the old behavior where it was an in-memory database, it was literally impossible for the game not to be found. So,
well, before it simply could have returned null.
So I guess that is
if there could, I mean, theoretically, with a race condition, theoretically it could have returned null from the load or find, because if save had not been called yet, the game repository did not start out with any default, so this would have been null.
Yeah.
So it would have failed on trying to reconstitute it with a null pointer exception.
Yeah.
Yeah, if the server restarted while we were playing, that would absolutely happen.
Yep. So I'd like to throw an exception that says something like, yes, this is bad. Yes, it should be fixed. I'm thinking, does Java have not implemented, or is that C#?
It has an unsupported operation. It could also be like an illegal state.
Yeah, let's do that.
No, I wanted to do that. It's not going to let me do that.
And let's put a message in explaining that
why is my finger's not working? Okay.
Something along the lines of the current design doesn't support games disappearing, but really should. No, it's not so much not yet exist, but might no longer be in the database.
I don't know how far I want to go with that.
I actually would put, but it should, as a message to our future selves.
Okay. Cosmic Red. And so this is that.
Right, because that returns the snapshot now.
Yep. Okay. All right.
Okay.
Somebody page 10. No, never put your own name in your exception messages.
Okay, I'm adding this to our to-do list. We need to fix illegal state exception in GameService.execute and save.
So Suichi says, are we going to have to do this for all of the loads? I think we have to do this for all the loads.
Well, I think a lot of them are being encapsulated by execute and save. I think,
but
the other ones.
But these is what I was thinking of.
Right. Well, actually, I think line 76, we should move into a method called load game.
Yeah, that's what I was going to do.
And then just use it everywhere.
Yeah. This is... All right.
Okay. What else do we have? Do we have anything else using load game old?
Let's go see. Oh, look at that.
Uh-huh.
It says it's not.
All
Are
right.
you sure? Because I don't always believe it, but it says so. So let's go ahead and say delete it.
Cool.
It's gone.
Let's check that in.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. So now we need to have load game throw a corrupted game exception.
Right. So
but actually, let's not do it that way. I think we can do it more incrementally by having GameService throw it from each of its methods. Because what I want to do is I want to write tests around it. Like we need to handle these things and then we need to handle them properly. So before we can do that, we need to have the ability to create a game service in a state where it will throw the game corrupted exception. Which means that we need. Can I scroll through for a second?
Go for it.
I think in game service, yep. Right here in nulled responses, what we need is with corrupted game. And that's kind of cool. So what do? We say that this dot GameDatabase equals GameDatabase dot create corrupted null. I think that's all we need.
Somebody's got to use that though, right?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
In the tests.
Yeah.
But let's go and let's commit that. Let's say that we've added game service dot nulled responses dot with corrupted game.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. So now let's go into one of our game service tests. Well, no, that's not game service test. Let's go into one of our controller tests.
I'm going to this one.
And let's say that so this again is where we'd want to have sort of a common thing where if we had a single entry point, we'd load the game. If it was a corrupted, we'd just display the game corrupted page. We don't really want to handle it in every single controller method.
Well, if the exception gets thrown to the controller, you can create a central point where all exceptions call a method on the controller.
Perfect. Yeah, let's do that. So let's write a test for that thing.
That would need to be a Spring test.
Is that going to be a pain in the butt?
It's going to be a little bit painful. Actually, that's going to be a lot painful because it's very difficult. This is because it's very difficult to get Spring. You'd have to set up test configurations to get all the corrupted null and other stuff set up so that it uses that for that test.
So when we create a new yacht controller and we call start game, you're just making a controller. So if that throws an exception, it throws it back to the test.
Right, because this is not a framework related test. This is basically saying the framework actually doesn't exist.
Right. So actually making the with corrupted game doesn't help us because we don't have the ability to write tests around that.
Not easily.
Not easily. I mean, not using the generic Spring thing.
Yeah, because so for example, you basically have to do a bunch of things like this to create the configuration. I mean, maybe it's not too bad.
I really don't want to go through another make Spring JPA session. That was painful.
This wouldn't be as bad. It's basically you have to create it, but I don't honestly want to do that here. I could do that offline to do it. It's just I'm not as fluent with that, so it'll just take a little bit of trial and error.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it wouldn't, like, what you've got is basically what we'd need. Instead of returning GameService.createNull, we'd call GameService.createNull and pass in nulled responses dot with corrupted game, and that would get us the corrupted game service. But getting that to wire up properly might be a pain in the butt. Let me just take another look at Yacht Controller.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, in that case, then maybe what we need to do is just propagate game corrupted all the way through and test it later.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might not be hard. I just don't want to sort of go down that.
Yeah, we've only got half an hour left.
Yeah.
I don't blame you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's. Do you want to put that on your to-do list then?
Yep. So web.
And I'm totally on board with not doing that on stream, by the way. It sounds like a pain in the butt.
Yes, it's one of those things where it's like I do it and then I don't have to deal with it for like months, and then I have to write another one. It's like, oh, let me go look up how that works again.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm gonna handle game corrupted. Okay. Note taken.
Okay, well, in that case, since we can't really make more progress unless we throw the corrupted game exception, let's just go ahead and do it. Normally, I would want to test drive it, and I think that's sort of streaming strats rather than real world strats. If this was the real world, we'd just go off and we'd figure that out and do it.
I mean, we can test that the method throws the exception. What we can't test is that when the exception is thrown, what page do you get?
Right. But testing that it throws the exception isn't super valuable.
Yeah, I'm just saying that I just wanted to be clear what it meant was that we're not.
Yeah.
Yeah. That we're basically testing, did we configure Spring correctly to handle and centralize the exception, which is the way I always think about, even in adapters and that are Spring, there's sort of these two kinds of tests. There's did I write the annotations correctly and stuff like that, and those are painful, and I try to write the least amount I can get away with. And then there's the other stuff, which is regardless what framework you're using, it needs to, not regardless, but without the framework involved.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
What do we want to throw from where?
Let's just start. Let's start at the top and then work our way down. So not at the top of the method, but at the top of the call stack. So well, let's just throw game corrupted from that. Can't throw it.
That can't throw. Yeah.
Anything that loads the game.
Yeah.
We'll throw game corrupted, and then that will force us to propagate. And we can just keep running our tests each time and probably end up in a good place.
So just a side note, game corrupt from a hexagonal standpoint, game corrupted is an adapter specific error message, and it's I might translate it here. I probably wouldn't, but I might translate it to a domain message, although it's really about the game, not loadable. So
from an A-frame perspective, A-frame architecture, this is the right level of abstraction.
Mm-hmm.
Game corrupted is the exception that the database presents to its callers.
Right.
And remember that UI and application is at the same level.
Mm-hmm.
So GameService is receiving game corrupted and passing it on to the UI, but they're conceptually at the same level, so there's no need to translate.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
In hexagonal, you are translating layers. You're going into the in adapter layer, so now you do have to translate it, but in A-frame you don't.
So this must have caused stuff to not compile. And indeed it did. But it also caused yacht controller to not compile for the same reason. Yep. No
problem?
No, I'm just thinking, okay, so we're just going to throw. So that's what we're going to do.
Because, that's why I'd want to test drive that we were handling game corrupted properly, because we're sort of throwing it into the void at this point.
Yeah.
But...
so this will, because we haven't programmed anything, this will currently just give you a generic 500 error page. Yep.
Yeah. But there should be a generic exception handler that you can do a if instance of game corrupted and then throw a, hey, sorry, that game that you spent hours playing and was super fun, you want to play some more, it's gone.
Pay us more money so we can give you another one.
Yeah. Insert and it's gone meme.
All right. There's a test. So here, we're not concerned about that. So I'll just exception.
I'm kind of surprised your tests don't already just throw exception by default.
They usually do. I've just been inconsistent in this application apparently. Yeah, so let's do. I
think you've got too many spaces.
So this just needs to rethrow. And that'll cause... No. Okay, so that compiles. All right.
Okay, so reroll also needs to throw game corrupted.
Do we want to do a commit?
No.
Okay.
Actually, I think this is sort of just grunt work. I don't think it's a big deal.
So reroll. It thinks it doesn't. Oh, it thinks it doesn't throw it because.
It's execute and save. Yeah, my
execute and save doesn't. Right. Well, if we put it on execute and save, then all the other ones will. But so once we do, this one will, because this well, this.
So is it still going to give us the appropriate compiler errors?
It should, because we said so, even if we're lying. Yeah.
Good.
So this is our controller, so we'll just throw it. And throw it. Yep. So
well, that was easier.
Assign current hand to as well. It's pretty much going to be one-to-one kind of thing.
Feeling much more in control this time compared to last time.
Yep. Okay. So now we can do it.
No, we need to do all the accessors. Current hand and can reroll and stuff.
Sorry, I was going to throw it from execute and save.
Oh, is that the last one that calls execute and save?
Because we've covered that one. That one.
Mm-hmm.
And that one. Yes, we have covered them all. So if we do this, this should make no changes.
That's right, except turning some of our gray text.
Right.
Not gray.
Excellent.
Good.
All right, so now we can go to the to these guys. So this will definitely cause a few places. All right. That's interesting.
What's that?
Oh, because it was already in a method that throws. Okay. I'm like, nobody was complaining.
And we'll probably see a fair amount of that because there's not a whole lot of logic in those controllers. Yeah. So fairly quickly, we're going to have covered all of them.
Okay. Ah, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if we have any left at this point. I'm happy to see our tests didn't need more updating.
Yeah.
You did have a throws exception on most of them.
Yeah, that's my default template, unless I use the other template. Unless I use there's a one my template, and then there's the built-in one. Sometimes you use the built-in one when I shouldn't. Mm-hmm. That's gonna be fine.
Is that all of them?
I think that's it. Well, we can find out by putting it on the load game itself.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, that could have been a lot worse.
Yep.
It's amazing what small steps do for you. We need to put it on an in-memory game repository. That should probably just work. Something's blowing up my logs.
That just worked.
Excellent.
So I can run all the tests just to make sure. All right.
Okay, definitely check this in.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. I don't know if we can do it in 20 minutes, but I think we're ready to inline in-memory game repository. Excuse me. Handle game corrupted exception in GameService and controllers.
All right. So now.
So we didn't end up wrapping GameDatabase.
Right.
Can we make in-game memory game repository extend GameDatabase?
There's no default constructor. I mean, we might just be able to change the type.
Just do it. Yeah.
Just see what happens.
Just YOLO it like we did before. But I think we've got everything set up now so that we can. Yeah, let's do it.
So if we do no, not that. No, not that.
So the problem is still we were going to have a couple of places. How does this work?
Let's see if this does the right thing.
I have never seen this refactoring before. What is this?
So this is type migration. I don't use it a lot because it seems like it should do what I want it to do, but doesn't. We're going to see if it does what we want it to do. Because it can't convert the expression, so never mind. It's meant for, like, I want to replace integer with big decimal, so they're sort of alike types and you can convert from one to the other, so not quite.
Let's try YOLOing it. I think we're close enough now. If you just change this to GameDatabase, we are going to have to change all of the tests that use in-memory game repository, but I think that's going to be okay.
I'm just thinking if there's
If this doesn't work, we can back up and take a smaller step.
Yep.
Pretty sure I know how we could do that, but this should be .create for.
Right. This one should be create. Yes.
Yep.
And
except it's not that. It's just new.
Right.
Because.
Right. This was that. I'm going to change that one last.
Okay.
I
don't think we're gonna have it. Yeah.
So this one is GameDatabase create null.
That's it.
But that's everything else is happy with GameDatabase. Okay, so now I can change this one.
Actually, hold on 1 second. That's not correct. The correct thing here is actually that.
Okay. I was wondering because we defined it and it's like, when are we going to use it? And I totally forgot about that.
Yeah.
So we need the caller to this, which is just there. So we need GameDatabase JPA. So this was where it blew up before. I still don't see why it should do that because that should be auto-wired. Let's see, that, and then
we say new GameDatabase
with that.
Yeah.
So
I still think that should have been a factory method because it's weird that we're inconsistent in that way. But I think we did that so that the auto wiring would work in the tests, right?
Well, I mean, well, now we can change it because we're now not relying on it to be auto-wired. We're wiring it ourselves. So we could change that now, assuming this works.
If this works, let's do that.
Yeah. Right, our tests. Okay, so
that can just pass in GameDatabase.create and all.
Yeah.
Oh no! Again, it has to be. Oh no! That's right. That's right.
Yeah, this one I think is right. And so Same thing here.
Right. GameService notification. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, we might be able to use the create null, but for now we'll just do.
Yeah.
Create null. Okay, so now it's complaining because, so this was what we saw before. So GameDatabase GPA. Why is it not able to wire it?
So what's going on here?
So it is saying that it can't find, it can't inject GameDatabase JPA. I don't understand.
Luigi says because it's a web MVC test, it doesn't load the JPA slice. I don't know what that means, but I'm reading it.
Oh, without that Spring Boot tests? Is that why? No, not that test. Although that's a problem. That's a separate problem. But let's fix the one I know how to fix. It's this one that is a web MVC test, right? It shouldn't be calling that at all.
Right.
So I'm confused why it's complaining.
It's complaining that it can't. When it says can't fail to load application context, what does that mean?
So that's the general thing, meaning it couldn't wire something up.
But what does it need to wire in this case?
So it's
Suigi says, can you just add a data JPA test?
No, the problem is the overriding of the. So here in the test configuration, which is where to go. So here, this should have been causing this to not be called at all. It's getting confused because of a very subtle magic. Is my suspicion. Let's see.
Severed skulls, that's going to be a question for Ted to answer. I don't know the answer to that one.
There we go. So this drives me crazy every single time. If you put configuration in the application, it is not considered sort of overridable by test configuration. If you pull it out into separate config, then it's like, oh, okay, I can replace this, and it's one of those.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, it's one of those things.
I love magic. Magic's awesome and cool.
Yeah. So that
I'm glad you knew that. That sounds like the kind of thing that you learn through painful experience.
Yes, indeed. So let me go back to running all the tests. So GameDatabase JPA, since it implements CRUD repository. CRUD repository has everything it needs. So CRUD repository itself is basically a repository, so it doesn't need that. Yeah, so now your application test fails, but that's fine. I can ignore that for now.
What are all these other failures?
So these, let me just go in here and disable this for a second. I'll fix this offline. So these failures are, this is expected of 400, got a 200. I'm actually less concerned about that.
Sorry, what was that?
I'm not concerned about that. I'm concerned about these, right? Right, because here, we made some assumption about the state.
Yeah, so I think let's change this back to the in-memory repository. We don't need to reset. We can just go back and change the type back. Get the test passing again, and I think we do need to take it a little more slowly so that now we need to move from being an in-memory database to being a configurable database, a nulled database.
Yeah, so this is going to be interesting because I'm not. I'll be interested to see how we, because it can't be configure. Well, I guess it could be configure. All right. Anyway, I'll stop.
We'll figure it out.
I'll stop.
I got some ideas.
Talk it up. So let's reset and reset that and reset that. Could I have just done the whole and then reset that and then reset that? That's fine. So now that'll cause. Yes, Luigi, those rely on the fake database. This method, right? I guess we don't need to inject this.
All right, we got to change these back too.
Yeah.
Luckily, we didn't have too many of them.
I thought I disabled you.
You sure looked like you disabled them. Does the order of annotations matter?
It shouldn't. I'm just going to take test off. Unless I... Oh. Maybe.
That's really weird.
Okay. We're back to where were you? Back to here at least.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and commit this because what we've done is we've resolved the Spring Boot errors associated with using GameDatabase.
So... Oops. So, sorry, what did you want to say we did?
Said resolved Spring Boot errors related to using GameDatabase.
Is that basically what we did?
Yeah, Suiji, that might be the way to go. What I was imagining was introducing, having the in-memory database rather than actually do the in-memory stuff, having it use, having it encapsulate or depend upon a nulled game database. And then we can move the load and save over one at a time. That's sort of where I was going with that. But I think we're actually probably should stop here for the day.
This is where we should stop. Yep.
All right. So thoughts, reflections?
Mainly the fact that the database implementations were not aligned was basically the source of this pain. And plus the implementation I had was like was the minimal possible to sort of demonstrate how the service interacts with the repository, and I was not handling any of the edge cases that we ended up handling in GameDatabase. So and like Suiji says, small steps are nice. It's like I've given presentations on sort of mindfulness and software development, and how like training yourself to notice can be really hard. That's why like tools like timers and so on are great. But like noticing, like, I'm starting to feel antsy. Why? Oh, because I'm a little nervous because we've now spent so much time with not even being able to run the tests, and then having the courage to say, all right, let me stop here. What have I learned? And then go back, take smaller steps, and go back and take smaller steps. And again, it's like it goes against the sort of the natural like way we often think. It's like we're always trying to make forward progress, but it's not always by grinding through one more thing, let's just fix that one more thing. And then it's because then we fixed all the errors, it's like, oh, now we've got compiler errors. It's like, what the heck's going on there? And now, and for me, I don't know, but it's for others, I'm like so frustrated because like, okay, I finally got it to compile, and now I see all these test failures all at once after I've grinded through getting compiler errors fixed. That just makes me want to walk away.
Yeah, no, I know what you're talking about. And we ended up doing exactly what we were talking about before, in that we took a big step. So we backed up, we took smaller steps, and then we ended up taking another not so big step, but having to back that out as well. But each time we're making progress. Like this time we actually fixed sort of the fundamental configuration issue. And now we're back to the point where now the tests are failing for a real reason, and now we just need to fix them. The other thing that we ended up getting sort of overridden by doing all of the it's as shippable as it was when we started. We ended up getting sort of not sidetracked, but we ended up sort of getting down into the weeds with the database. But I really enjoyed the reflective design discussion and looking at all the design work we did at the beginning. And I think that will be really interesting when we get to the point where we can start refactoring and seeing what happens if we merge that game service and game together. I think there's some real potential there.
And it sort of brings to mind, like, how do we sort of, as professionals, right, how do we improve? And unless you go back and look at code, especially code that you've written, and sort of reevaluate it, and if you think like, oh, it's perfect the way it was, I'd be a little concerned.
Yeah,
because I'm like,
I've never written code that was perfect when I looked at it again. I was like, oh my God, what was I smoking?
Yeah, it might have seemed great at the time, or maybe we thought, oh, I'm taking a shortcut or whatever, but it's good enough.
It's better than it was.
But sort of going back and reevaluating, even if you're not going to change it, I think it's a great exercise, and it doesn't take very long because you're not going to be modifying anything. But looking at stuff with sort of fresh eyes, I think is really instructive.
It is. And I mean, not to disagree with that, but it's also like, it's not just an exercise. Like, really work this way. When you're modifying your code, do this reflective design, look at the design, see how you can improve it. Because it's, even though like doing the refactoring, in this case, it's kind of a big deal moving from an in-memory database with a different API to an actual database with real edge conditions and error handling and all this stuff. It's a big deal. So it's a big change, but it's easier to do this than to leave things the way they were and work around it.
Oh yeah.
Like maybe like, well, we kind of did that with and if we don't find the optional, then we throw an exception.
Right.
Like, yeah, we got past that quickly now.
Right.
But in the future, when we have our customers calling us and saying, yeah, every so often I try to play the game and I get a 500 error. What's that about?
Right. and then we look at the
yet,
logs and we see the error message and we're like, oh no, we didn't fix that.
Yeah. Or the business people coming to us and say, yeah, about 1% of our customers just disappear and never come back. And we're like, well, that's because you're crappy salespeople. Well, no, it's actually because we 500 on them.
Right.
Those sorts of problems, if you don't fix them, if you don't fix your design, that's where you get really flaky software.
Yeah.
And it does show up in the edge conditions first.
Yeah. Well, one thing that's nice about, doing that analysis and thinking before you do the refactoring is absolutely do that. I think what's nice about just doing it for the sake of learning and looking is I think there's a little bit less stressful. Yeah.
And I agree. Like I said, I didn't want to decrease what you're saying there. I just don't want people to think that this is something you only do to learn. But you're absolutely right. There's so much value in critically analyzing code. Either yours, hey Tramstars, either your own or others. Mm-hmm. It's just get used to analyzing code. It's actually not that hard. People think about legacy code as this sort of scary black box. If you start with your own code, it'll be easier because you'll remember what you were thinking. But the sort of core idea of just trace through the dependencies, that can get you a long way.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. Well, fun as always, Ted.
Yes.
So next time we'll come back and we will
take a smaller step.
Finish modifying the database. We'll what?
Take a smaller step.
Take a smaller step. Yeah, we'll finish modifying the database.
Yeah.
That'll be interesting because it'll be a week later and we'll have no idea what we were talking about.
What we're doing.
Yeah. And then we can start looking at doing the refactoring part of Reflected.
Yeah.
That'll be fun.
All right. Thanks, folk. Thanks for hanging out. Sorry you joined late, Tramstars, but there's always the video. Thanks, Sweegie and others for your comments and interactions. We love them as always. And we'll see you next time.
All right. Next Monday, 1 to 4 Pacific.
All right.